It is crossover Thursday. The Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Rams, both teams in evaluation mode for the future, trying to finish the 2022 season strong. Merry Christmas this week from Locked On Broncos and Locked On Rams. Happy holidays. I'm Locked On Broncos co-host Sarah Bettinger here with Travis Rogers of Locked On Rams, and we're excited for these two teams to face off on Christmas Day, a little rare Christmas Day game for the teams here. Thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos or Locked On Rams your very first listen every day, wherever you listen to podcasts or if you watch on YouTube. We appreciate you. Travis, here we are. It's late in the NFL season. I think we thought that both of these teams would be in very different positions, but look, the Rams and the Broncos, they at least have a couple things in common these last few years, right? They've got both a Super Bowl win with Von Miller on the team, and
that's right.
Also not going to make the playoffs the year after winning the Super Bowl, right? So
right.
It's kind of two sides of the coin there, but I'm eager to hear from you. I'm sure you're ready as I am for this season to kind of be over with. And, we kind of talked about that before we started recording here today, but at the same time, I think there's still, as Cody and I have been talking about, I'm sure you've been talking about, still evaluation mode, still kind of like a preseason, get to see some of these guys play, get to see them get a chance to go out and make a name for themselves these last few games here. I'm interested to hear from you from the Los Angeles Rams perspective. What are the biggest storylines going into this matchup between the Broncos and Rams on Christmas Day?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple going into the last, handful of games here on the schedule. Just one thing that going back to what you mentioned about, winning the Super Bowl and then missing the playoffs the year after that. Peyton Manning retired after that Super Bowl. The Rams theoretically were trying to run it back all over again, and it's certainly not gone the way that they were hoping to. Which I think is actually probably the number one storyline that I think, going into this game is Baker Mayfield and trying to figure out exactly what, if any, role he might play in your organization beyond just getting you to the end of the line. It was interesting. You go back a couple of games, and when they played the Raiders on Thursday night, there were no expectations for him. And he came in, and he'd been in the building for literally about 30 hours, and he ran 10 plays at practice and went out there and put together the one good night that the Rams have had all season long, and they win a big game. Fast forward to what we saw more recently on Monday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers, and it was a lot of what you'd seen from the Rams really every other week this season, a lot what you'd seen from Baker Mayfield at his previous stops in Cleveland and in Carolina. So I think what the Rams are trying to figure out is if Baker Mayfield is available and no one else gives him a starting job, which is probably likely, is this the person that you would like to have as your number one backup behind Matthew Stafford? Because Matthew Stafford is getting to that age where injuries are going to become probably something that are more common than uncommon. He missed a lot of time this year. His wife has made some noise about his future health and safety and these sorts of things. So I think that is Baker Mayfield a better quarterback than the two backups you have on your roster right now, Bryce Perkins and John Wolford? Yes. Is he somebody that fits into your organization? I think that's what Sean McVay is trying to figure out. And I think for me, over the course of, the Bronco game coming up, and they got two more, they've got the Chargers and the Seattle Seahawks on the back end, figuring out if he is a good fit in your building is their number one priority.
And that's going to be fun to see. I know after his debut with the Rams, a lot of Broncos fans were lamenting, hey, why didn't we put in a waiver claim on Baker Mayfield, right? So a lot of Oklahoma fans crossing over into Broncos country love Baker Mayfield. So watching his career with a lot of intrigue, obviously dating back to 2018, the Broncos had a top 5 pick that year. A lot of fans were hoping to get him back then. So, I mean, it's a long tenured, unrequited love between the Broncos and Baker Mayfield. So I know a lot of fans are pulling for him, although we'll see this weekend, right?
I would encourage them to go watch Baker Mayfield this weekend and see if they still feel the same way. I got caught up in the moment on Thursday night, and it was fun because the Rams have had a really difficult season, and he did bring some energy, and he did bring a spark, and he played really, really well. But what you saw on Monday night was more, I think, what you've seen from Baker Mayfield in his NFL career, with a little bit frantic, a little bit sped up, maybe not quite sure exactly what it is he wanted to do with the football. Now, that could just be that's how Baker Mayfield plays in the NFL. It could also be a function of the fact that the Rams have used 14 different, literally, that's not an hyperbole. They've used 14 different offensive linemen this season. Their two best wide receivers are done for the year. Their tight end finally caught his first touchdown pass of the year in week 15. So to try to evaluate the quarterback in those circumstances is very, very difficult.
It's brutal, and I think that leads to kind of my biggest storyline from the Denver Broncos perspective in this game. It's kind of an underrated storyline. Yeah, everybody's going to be talking about Russell Wilson returning to the lineup this week, but to me, the biggest storyline in this game is going to be this defense for the Denver Broncos. They have 8 interceptions over the last 3 games, including in the last 2 games against Patrick Mahomes, and then this past weekend against the Cardinals quarterbacks. Obviously, played both Colt McCoy and Trace McSorley. 6 interceptions in those 2 games. So they're really racking up the picks. And Baker Mayfield has historically done pretty well against the Denver Broncos. I know it's a smaller sample size, but it'll be interesting to see. I know that they're going to probably try to mitigate the mistakes from him, limit the mistakes, and give him the easy options to throw. But the Broncos have, if they've done anything well this season, Travis, it's been really playing against the pass. And so if the Rams get into a situation where they're throwing the ball a lot, I see that as a big advantage for the Denver Broncos in this game, and an opportunity for guys like Pat Surtain, Justin Simmons, the rookie Damari Mathis, who's playing outstanding this season, K'Wan Williams, a nickel corner who I'm sure you're familiar with from his time in the NFC West as well. So that Denver Broncos secondary picking off 8 passes the last 3 games, they've become now the number one storyline for this team. Has no opportunity for really a resurgence this season, but as we come to a close in 2022, that area of the team, I think, is going to help the Broncos finish strong. So we're going to take a look at some of these matchups that we have coming up in this game, Travis, and I'm excited to talk about it. I know I love football. I know in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we're going to be saying, man, I wish the Broncos and Rams were playing football.
for sure.
So we'll get to that point, but this episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. And that's why you'll be able to find an episode from The League available as a bonus episode on Locked On NFL, narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. You won't want to miss these untold stories spanning from the 1940s all the way through to the present. So head on over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible, get in the game. All right, Travis, we're looking at key matchups here for the Broncos versus the Rams. When the Broncos are on offense, the Rams are on defense. Give me your top matchups in this game that you're going to be looking out for.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been really interesting this season, because the Rams haven't been able to win a bunch of games, you're looking at more matchups and individual performances. And I think it's been a bit of a mixed bag. And I'm talking about Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey, relative to the league, is having a fine season. Jalen Ramsey is still one of the better corners. He's still one of the best players at his position. Jalen Ramsey, relative to what he is against himself, is not having a good year. This has not been a Jalen Ramsey year like we saw for most of last year. What was interesting is it kind of started to trend in the opposite direction in the postseason last year. The Rams obviously had a very easy night against the Arizona Cardinals in that wild card round. And after that, Jalen Ramsey really struggled. He struggled against Tampa and Tom Brady. He struggled against San Francisco, maybe a little bit less, but there were some plays. And then in the Super Bowl, he had a couple of plays, you kind of head scratchers along the way. And you're thinking, okay, is he trying to take a chance? Is he trying to make a big play? Fast forward to this season, and it's really continued all season long. You saw DK Metcalf catch a game-winning touchdown against him a few weeks ago. You saw Devontae Adams hit a couple of big ones on him on Thursday night. You saw Aaron Rodgers kind of look his way a handful of times on Monday night. These are things that did not happen with Jalen Ramsey for those previous time in LA. So what happens against the Broncos, I think, will be very interesting. Now, the Russell Wilson component of all of this is the great wild card, because, A, I'm a little bit surprised he's going to play at all. He's obviously, you would know better than I would, but has not had the season that I think anybody was really expecting. So how does Jalen Ramsey play? Do they go at him? Do they stay away from him? Because if he continues to, I don't want to say struggle, because I feel like that's a little bit too strong of a word, but if he continues to maybe slightly decline the way that he has over the course of this season and towards the end of last season, I think then all of a sudden you start thinking of, do we make a move in a different direction? Do you maybe use a player, Jalen Ramsey specifically, or somebody like Jalen Ramsey, to maybe kind of restock your war chest with draft picks and have some flexibility and these sorts of things? Because the Rams are in a weird spot where they've had a 5-year run where you went to the Super Bowl twice, won it once, but now all of a sudden your best players are getting a little older. You don't have a lot of draft picks. You don't have a lot of flexibility. So Jalen Ramsey's performance really from now through the end of the line is the thing that I'll have my eye on.
Well, that is very, very interesting that you say that. I think obviously this is a little off our script a little bit, but you hear some of the rumors or you read some of the stuff about Sean McVay and TV and all these different things about could the Rams do this or that. I mean, how do you actually buy into that very much? I mean, I know we're getting close to that time where these rumors are going to heat up regardless, but do you really buy into those?
For Sean McVay, no. Could the Rams go in a different direction, generally speaking, and what could that mean for Allen Robinson, Bobby Wagner, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald, these sorts of things? And Donald, I'd put in a slightly different category as well. But I would be, and this is the word I use, I would be stunned if Sean McVay was not the coach of this team next year. Stunned. I think that, having spoken to him a number of times, having listened to him talk really from the moment he got the job a few years ago, this is a football coach. He's not a broadcaster. I believe he'd be very good as a broadcaster. I think that he'd be able to translate and make that transition very, very effectively. However, you don't get juice sitting in the booth looking and talking about what the other guys did. You get juice by doing it yourself, and Sean McVay lives on the juice. I'd be shocked if he left. He's 36 years old. He's not going to go away from football. Now, if he were 46 or maybe even 40 and he's been doing it for 10 years, then maybe that's a little bit different. But this is only his 6th year in the league as a head coach.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things. I think people want to talk and people want to bring stuff up because that shock factor, right? I like it or not, the shock factor gets people interested in football. So I think that's fascinating, but I'm glad to hear it from your perspective, because obviously that gives the listeners some perspective from our Broncos listeners, and even obviously the Rams listeners who hear you on a daily basis, to get to kind of hear just kind of, okay, what can we expect in the next few weeks here? But back to this game and the matchups, you mentioned Jalen Ramsey, kind of keeping an eye on him. That is something that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on in this game, because we're recording this earlier in the week. We don't necessarily know the final injury report. Teams like to keep that close to the vest until, Friday, Saturday, if possible, in some cases. So will Courtland Sutton be playing in this game? And how will the Broncos utilize Jerry Jeudy, who has kind of been, I would say this has really been his breakout year. He was pretty good as a rookie. And then in year 2 under Pat Shurmur, it was a disaster. But year 3 here, somehow he's gotten things going late. He had an ankle injury earlier in the season, knocked him out for a few games, but he has been the Broncos' breakout player, especially over the last month or so, I would say. The Broncos are using him a lot more in that X wide receiver position, not less all encompassing in the slot, but less comparatively to earlier in the season. So where Jerry Jeudy lines up, if Courtland Sutton plays, how that affects those two guys, that's going to be fascinating. Also, very much looking forward to, you mentioned the Rams have had 14 offensive linemen play. I don't know if the Broncos are close to that, but it feels like it, because their combination is different every single week on the offensive line. So watching that Broncos offensive line against that Rams pass rush, the defensive front, can they keep, like you said, it's kind of surprising if Russell Wilson's going to play, which the Broncos did declare last week that he's going to. If Russell plays, or considering the foregone conclusion that he plays, how is that going to affect? Because we saw Brett Rippon take 7 sacks against the Arizona Cardinals this past weekend. So the offensive line a bit porous for the Denver Broncos this season. So that will be fascinating to see. I'm also looking forward to knowing your thoughts when the Rams are on offense. What's the big matchup you're looking forward to here against the Broncos?
So you mentioned something a minute ago about how the Denver pass defense has been something that they've really been able to lean on over the last few weeks. And that is very bad news for the Rams, because the fact of the matter is the Rams do not run the ball. They're one of the worst running teams in the league. In fact, going back to Monday night when they played the Packers, Cam Akers ran for 65 yards, and that was the first time a Ram running back all season long had gone for 65 yards or more. They were the last team in the league to get to that 65-yard threshold. and he got exactly 65 yards. And it was just, this is what they've struggled with all year long. Now, at the beginning, it was more of a function of you had kind of a two-headed monster with Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson. They released Darrell Henderson a few weeks ago, so he's no longer in the way. You've got Kyren Williams, the rookie out of Notre Dame, who's been given a handful of opportunities, but not a lot. But even with Cam Akers getting the lion's share of the opportunity, it still has not worked. And part of that is the offensive line, like we talked about that. Part of that is the fact that Cooper Kupp has missed as much time as he has, so there's not really that other offensive threat. Allen Robinson, before he was shut down for the season, really had a completely bust of a season. He wasn't really much of a threat. So now you're down to guys like Van Jefferson and Ben Skoranek and Tutu Atwell. These are not the Los Angeles Rams that people thought that they were going to be playing at the start of the season, and they're defended accordingly. So you have these opportunities where you can get pressure on the quarterback by only sending 4. You can stop the run without having to stack the box. And you've got a lot of guys in the secondary to defend a passing game that is really struggling to begin with. And this is why the Rams have only scored more than 20 points twice all season long. Their offense is very, very limited, and especially right now with your fourth quarterback in Baker Mayfield. So when they have the ball, if they can get Cam Akers going somehow, some way, Sean McVay was talking about it, that he did see some things he liked against Green Bay. I didn't see him, but I'm assuming Sean McVay knows a little bit more about it than I do. But if they can get him going, that's the matchup that I'll have my eye on.
Well, we'll see. Former Rams assistant Ejiro Evero, obviously Marcus Dixon, now the Broncos defensive line coach. A lot of former Rams coaches coaching up that Broncos defense. We'll see if that familiarity there can help out from the Broncos perspective. And I would say, going along with kind of what you said, the Broncos have been okay stopping the run this year. I wouldn't say sporadic is the right word. They've had a couple outlier games against like Josh Jacobs where you give up a ton of rushing yards multiple times, but then you go and shut down Derrick Henry. So it's really hard to know on a week-to-week basis what kind of run defense you're going to get. I'm looking at the pass rush for the Denver Broncos in this game. This is one of the number one things that I love to watch in general when it comes to football, but especially when we're in evaluation mode for a team, or like back in the Broncos Super Bowl season, or I'm sure like for you with the Rams Super Bowl season last year, watching the pass rushers it's just fun. And they get into a groove. And I think these Broncos players, Randy Gregory is back. He's going to be in his second game back after having a knee scope. And him paired with Baron Browning could be the future for the Denver Broncos off the edge. This is really going to be one of the first times we've gotten to see that, because previously it was Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb with Baron Browning kind of rotating in. So here against the Rams, we're going to get to see, after Randy Gregory got his feet wet against the Cardinals this past week, coming back from that knee scope, how those two can play together at full speed, hopefully full strength. And that's going to be fun to see. I'm excited for it. I think that Broncos fans, probably that's one of the few things, in addition to the secondary, like I mentioned before, to really be pumped about. This defense is very good. I don't know if Ejiro Evero is going to get a head coach look this offseason, Travis, but I think it's coming soon. He's done a fantastic job of scheming pressure, putting guys in the right position, utilizing whatever personnel, whatever hand he's dealt out there. So those are some great matchups. I think this is going to be a lot more fun of a game for people to watch on Christmas Eve than maybe meets the eye on paper. Obviously, the records don't indicate it, but it's football nonetheless. And like I said, in a few weeks, we're going to be wishing that we had these teams back. So I'm looking forward to it, Travis. And we're going to get into some predictions here for this game, look into the crystal ball. But before we do, let me tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball, World Cup. You got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those over at BetOnline as well. It's always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI. All right, Travis, we are looking ahead to some predictions here for Broncos versus Rams on Christmas Day. And let's just rip the Band-Aid off here. What do you got for a prediction for this game? It's tough to predict teams this late in the season, right? It's hard to know exactly what you're going to get, even though we have some trends going. So what are your predictions for Broncos Rams on Christmas Day?
Well, I'll start by saying this, that I think that this is the one of the remaining 3 games that the Rams have. This is the one that I think they can honestly look and say, we got a chance to win this game. Maybe not be favored to win this game. Maybe not have this is a game that you can put in the win column and feel pretty good about, but a chance to win a game. And the fact of the matter is the Rams came out of their bye week at 3-3 and kind of in it. They hadn't played well, but the way that the lay of the land was, they were kind of in it. Then they lost 6 games in a row. They went nearly, a full 2 months without winning a football game. They grabbed the one against the Raiders, give them a little momentum, but then, like I mentioned a minute ago, immediately looked like they had before and lost to the Green Bay Packers. With what's coming up next, Chargers and Seahawks, both road games, and SoFi road game for the Chargers, maybe a kind of a quasi road game, but they will be the road team in that game. The Chargers are a good team, or at least they can be a good team at times. Seattle is very likely to be playing for something meaningful in that last game of the season. And this may be the last chance for the Rams really to have an opportunity to win a game. The last thing you want to do is finish the season losing 10 of your last 11 games, even though you just had a Super Bowl championship. 10 of 11, that is a long run. If they can put another win on the board, I think this is their chance to do it, and I think they know that, and I think they'll come out ready to go. The how of it all, I think, is the big question. You've got your 4th starting quarterback. Mention the offensive line. Mention the trouble they've had in the running game. Mention the wide receiving core that they have right now. No Aaron Donald on the other side of the ball. No official word there, but I'd be stunned if we saw Aaron Donald again during this season. And they have struggled really across the board, with the exception of Bobby Wagner and Jalen Ramsey on defense. Not a lot really to get excited about. So I think it depends a lot more on what the Broncos do. If they continue to be, to struggle offensively, if Russell Wilson continues to look like he's looked for a good portion of the season, maybe this is another one of those games the Rams can win in the teens. Because if these teams get into the 20s, or I should say the Rams opponent gets into the 20s, they simply don't have the horsepower. They just can't score enough points to do that. I don't think that they are going to do it. I'll give the Rams a narrow opportunity to win this game, something 17-14, 14-13, something along those lines, because they're getting a touchdown or so a game. They're kicking a handful of field goals. And I really think that's their only path to victory. They're not going to go out there and all of a sudden look like the Rams under Sean McVay a few years ago and put up 30 points. If they're going to win this game, it's going to be in the teens.
That would be familiar territory for the Denver Broncos this year, right? I mean, they're averaging roughly 14 points a game. It's been embarrassing, to be honest with you. So I've gone into these predictions, Travis. I think what you said you're spot on. I mean, that's what we've come to kind of expect from both of these teams throughout the season. For the Denver Broncos in this game, I like to give a couple predictions. I like to go with my head and my heart on two different predictions here. So try to manifest some positivity, even when I'm not feeling it in terms of the reality. But I think that, look, we're looking, can the Broncos defense continue to stay hot? Like I mentioned, they've picked off 8 passes as a defense in the last 3 games. Can they stay hot in this game against Baker Mayfield, who, like you said, I mean, he had to pick up that offense in a very short amount of time, went out there and did some impressive things, but then kind of came crashing back. I was watching that Green Bay game on Monday night as well. It just kind of looked like, okay, maybe that was just a little
look like Baker Mayfield.
Baker Mayfield, yeah, a little Tebow time there on Thursday night a few weeks ago. So, and then can Russ pick up where he left off against Kansas City? You mentioned it. He has not been playing like the Russ that we've all come to know. And I know that the Rams are the only NFC West team he has a losing record against, but still, you come to expect a certain level of play from him on any given week. So Russell Wilson, it was the guy that we all thought we were getting for the second half against Kansas City before he went down with that concussion. He was balling out and he was playing extremely well. And that's the kind of thing that it's just like, okay, it was a small sample size, but can we bank on that going forward? The Broncos have done a pretty good job these last couple weeks and it seems sad to say this, Travis, so don't laugh at me here, but man, 2 straight weeks they've scored 24 plus points. That's the first time that's happened this season. Can they make it 3? Like you mentioned, if this game stays in the teens, I think it's a coin flip either way of who wins the game based on, man, which team makes more mistakes or which team can limit the mistakes. I'm wondering for this game, can the Broncos get to 24 plus points, because the Rams have given up 24 plus in 6 of their last 8. And so that's going to be the key, I think, and Nathaniel Hackett, he's fighting for his job out there. The Broncos defense being super healthy right now, that leads me to believe that they will ultimately, take this game, whether it's in the teens, like you said, in a 1-score game like we've seen all season long for the Denver Broncos, or whether Russell Wilson and the offense can actually put some points on the board, maybe score a few touchdowns. I'm in the same boat as you, Travis. I think you look at the next couple of weeks, the Broncos play Kansas City. They play the Chargers in the season finale as well. So you look at this game as one that they could potentially win and maybe be their last win of the season. We'll see. So I'm with you. I feel like a narrow chance of the Broncos coming away with victory. The way they've played offensively this season, still skeptical that they can go out there and really get it done. But at the same time, kind of feeling like, okay, if you're the defense playing at the level that it is right now, going up against a guy who just got the playbook 2 weeks ago, you go out and do your job, especially with the familiarity that Ejiro Evero has, I'm sure, with the basic concepts of Sean McVay's offense and the things that they're going to have to run with Baker Mayfield out there. I think that does give the Broncos a bit of an advantage. I also like that they get to play in Los Angeles. I mean, who wouldn't at this time of year? Denver is not the nicest place in the world right now. Certainly better than Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm at. But Travis, I think we both agree. It could be a close game here. Could be a coin flip either way. Both teams don't really deserve any sort of ultimate confidence to say they are going to win this game at this point in time. So that's kind of where I'm at. Any final thoughts from you on this matchup?
I'll give you one more little nugget that if the Broncos are in the game or have the lead at the half, you should feel very good about what's about to happen, because the way that this season has unfolded, really without exception for the Rams, is they hang around for 2 quarters. They might even be tied. It could be 10-7. It could be 10-6 or 9-3 or whatever. They're in the game, and then the second half starts, and they're not. They have been a really bad second half team, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, because whatever horsepower they have offensively early on with those scripted series plays, the adjustments that the opposition is making really start to take hold in the second half. And you're seeing a lot of 3-point performances, shutouts. I think they've been shut out 4 times in the second half this year. So if Denver has the lead at the half, they should feel very, very good about what's coming next.
Well, we'll see what happens here as the Broncos get set to travel to Los Angeles, play against the Rams on Christmas Day, a rare Christmas Day game for both of these fan bases. And thank you so much once again for making Locked On Broncos, Locked On Rams your first listen of the day, every day, wherever you listen to podcasts or if you watch on YouTube. We appreciate you, and have a Merry Christmas.